Hello, everyone. Happy Wednesday. Welcome to the weekly show of Classroom Without Walls, episode 131. Oh, yeah, I think 131. And on this show, I interview leading social media, digital marketers, entrepreneurs, business owners to share with us their best practices so that we can future-proof our business. And today, we are talking about how to get you and your business featured in the media. Isn't that amazing, right? And join me live is the one and only Justin Goldstein. Justin is an award-winning public relations professional. And Justin is also the president and the founder of Press Record Communications.
Yes.
Yeah, Justin is also a PR exceptional under 35, and he has been in the PR and media relations space for quite a few years and helped many of his clients secure media placements on quite a few different major media platforms. And really excited. And so if you are a business owner, if you are an entrepreneur, if you have a personal brand, and you are looking for ways to get yourself, your name out there to be featured in the media, this episode is perfect for you. You are going to walk away from today's interview with a much better understanding of what are the specific benchmarks that reporters, journalists, and media are looking for before they decide to interview or not. What are some common mistakes that you need to avoid when you are sending that cold message, when you are reaching out to a reporter? And we are also going to discuss podcasts and how you can effectively leverage podcasts to secure media placements and so much more. So make sure you stay until the end to get all the juicy ideas so that you can get yourself and your business featured in the media. And we are live on LinkedIn, and we are also live on Facebook, on YouTube, on Periscope, and on Twitch. So if you are live with us right now, and please let me know in the comment section where you are joining us live from, social media wise and geographically speaking. So welcome to the show, Justin.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, honored. So we have quite a few people with us live right now. Thank you so much. My dear friend Peter is in the comment section monitoring your questions and comments. So if I miss a question from you, feel free to tag him, and he is going to make sure that we ask your question. So do you want to add anything to my very brief introduction, Justin?
I think you covered it very nicely. Just good to be here.
Awesome. So let's get started. And as I mentioned earlier, today we're talking about press release, press coverage, how to get your name out there. And you are an award-winning PR pro, and you have worked with so many clients. And I wonder if you can share with us a few success stories in terms of how media coverage has helped some of your clients accelerate their business to a new level. I know you couldn't mention names, so maybe you can share the industries with us, like kind of the generic story.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, again, thank you so much for having me on the podcast today. So the one that really sticks out to me is I've been working with a nonprofit that is in the food bank space. And essentially they relaunched an app this year that look to drive user donations, or the way to understand it is a user would go to, say, a grocery store or a restaurant, make a purchase, and then they would, the app would round their purchase up to the nearest dollar, and all of the roundups in terms of the spare change would go to food banks around the country. And so once we started doing media relations around this and looking to secure coverage, the app actually saw a spike in user growth, which was great to see. And then one of the other perks of getting that media coverage was that reporters were actually starting to intro us to food banks that they have relationships with. So not only were we getting a spike in users from the media coverage, but we were also getting new partners to help expand, or get the word out about the organization, and also bring in some new partnerships that might help to aid their funding and also the company would then have more of a direct line to the food banks that they're trying to help. So I think it was helpful from, obviously a business perspective, and also from a goodwill perspective of being able to help those food banks.
Wow, that is really interesting. Thank you for sharing that story with us. Any other stories in different industry? Do you have any story in education? I'm just curious because I work kind of in the education space.
Yeah, sure. So I worked with a big tech association that had experts around the world in all different types of technologies, and one of them was ed tech, so education technology. And so the person that I worked with, the expert, he just had no media experience whatsoever. So we had to media train him a bit to make sure, much like we're doing today, that he was well equipped to speak with reporters. And once we were able to do that, we actually got him some placements in some awesome education magazines. So you might have put some names like Inside Higher Ed, EdTech Digest. We were able to get him there, and that helped to also get him some speaking opportunities since he was able to put that media coverage on his speaking application and sort of his resume. And so he was able to secure some additional opportunities from that, he told me, and it was good to be able to push that through. But yeah, getting into those magazines, I think, was a huge win for him, and talking about the future of education, technology, was something that was good to see.
All right, that's awesome. Yeah, I got featured in Inside Higher Education. It's a great place. Yeah. Yeah. Speaking of which, and after working with so many clients, what are some common mistakes that people make in terms of securing media placement? I feel like this is something that everyone wants to have. One is not enough. We want to get more and more. Almost like every major publication. So sometimes people can be really desperate. So what are some common mistakes that you have observed?
Yeah, so I think you actually hit on a really good point, which is that I think when we're feeling desperate to get media coverage, we take, and this is a common term that's used in the industry, it's more of a spray and pray approach, meaning that you kind of develop a pitch to reporters, right? And for those that aren't familiar with what that means, in these times, it's an email to reporters to offer up yourself as a source on different kinds of stories, or offer a story that they might even want to cover that they might have not even thought about. And it's essentially an email to that reporter, right? And in the spray and pray approach, you're basically just developing that email and blasting it out against or to a million contacts and hoping that somebody's going to respond and express interest in using you as a source. And I think one of the key mistakes that comes from that is not only could you not be targeting the right reporters, but you also might not be targeting the right publications, right? So I think the first thing you need to do when you're looking to go into a media relations program is to understand what your goals are. So if the goal is to get in front of a target audience that's, let's say, going to buy your product, getting into the New York Times sounds great. And of course it is great, but it's not necessarily going to move the needle in terms of building an audience that's going to follow you and eventually, hopefully, which you never guarantee with media relations, but hopefully they're going to buy your products. Instead, you want to try to get into those trade magazines, much like you were talking about in the education space with an higher ed, for example, that's reaching your core audience, going to your target audience that's actually going to influence their decisions and connect with them to do so. So I think to sum that up, I would say one of the key mistakes is not getting a good understanding of the kind of audience that you want to reach up front and targeting those publications that are actually going to directly reach that audience, not necessarily sort of a general audience that might include your target audience in that. And then I would also say that, when you're working with reporters, it's really important to keep in mind that it's not about what you think is interesting. It's about what they think is interesting. So you might think that you have the greatest story in the world. It's innovative. It's something that's going to attract a lot of attention, but it might not have anything to do with what they cover on a daily basis, right? And so especially when you're going to reporters that are in the print online space, which basically means they write for outlets that have let's say a magazine, but also a website, those reporters oftentimes cover specific beats. So if somebody's on the cybersecurity beat and you're pitching them something that has to do with, the future of college, education in the classroom, that has nothing to do with what they write about, right? So they're not going to find it interesting. They're not going to gravitate towards that and want to cover something like that. So you have to get a really good understanding of what exactly it is that they need to cover, and also within that, storylines that their audience is actually going to find interesting. Because in today's digital world, it's really more about what's going to drive engagement to their pages, what's going to get clicks, what's going to, get conversation going on Twitter, because ultimately the more engagement that those publications get, the more, let's say, advertising they're going to get because they're getting that engagement. So they want to make sure that whatever they're covering is going to really make an impact and matter. And then I would also say that, I think spokespeople are often feeling pressure to say something they don't really know the answer to in an interview. But you should know that it's your right as a guest and a spokesperson or a source or a reporter to say that you don't know something, right? And that's what we teach a lot when we do media training. It's called blocking and bridging, which means that you kind of acknowledge the question that's being asked, but then bridge into something that is more in line with what you can talk about. So you can say something like, I really appreciate the question. It's a valuable question, but I think what's more interesting to talk about is X, Y, Z. And then you go into what you really want to get into. So I think, again, it's taking a step back and feeling comfortable or getting comfortable with the fact that you don't have to live up to some false expectation that you need to comment on something that the reporter, especially in a situation where the reporter didn't give you a heads up that he or she wanted to talk about something, you don't have any responsibility to do that.
Oh, I love that. Such a great answer. So here is a question from Susan. Thank you for joining us live. Actually, I have a similar question related to hers. So when it comes to targeting reporters, how is it best to develop your list? Do you need introductions, or is it okay to email them, kind of cold messaging? Yeah, so share with us.
Sure. Yeah, no, you can absolutely reach out to reporters cold. There's absolutely no reason why you need an introduction to reach out. Of course, it would be better if you had an introduction and somebody that could refer you, because they'll recognize that person's name and they'll, take you more seriously at the outset. But if you are going to reach out cold or conduct cold outreach, I think it's important to go back to what I said, which is to make sure that, especially in your email, you're offering something of value to that reporter. So I think we're going to get into this in a little bit later segment of the interview, but it's, giving them something like new survey findings, showing them a new report that might be valuable for their reporting, or, offering up your background to go on into a conversation that's off the record, let's say, just to give them some information that will help their reporting, right? So providing value to them. And again, making sure that everything you're providing is in line with what they cover, so they do find that valuable. But yeah, to answer your question, absolutely, you can reach out cold. It's just doing the due diligence up front to figure out what's going to actually get them to open their email or answer your call and stay on the phone.
I love that. Yeah, so I agree, right? Already so much value. So thanks.
Great.
So I wonder, I'm just curious, and I assume even I'm not a reporter, just on LinkedIn and the different social media platforms on a daily basis, I receive so many cold messages.
Yeah.
And like oftentimes I don't even click on any. So I wonder if there is a magic template. Let's say that we are sending a cold email. So is it better to email or social media cold messaging? Which one do you think is more effective? And is there a template that we should follow? First paragraph say this, second paragraph say this, and third paragraph if we are sending an email.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say that there isn't necessarily one format that works, especially in terms of outreach. So the one thing I would say that's consistent across the board is that every reporter is going to feel differently about reaching out to them on social media. Some of them are okay with it. Some of them find it to be an annoyance and sort of an invasion of, I wouldn't say privacy, but just their personal space, because, even if they might, tweet an article of theirs, for example, they want to use that as a way to kind of just get away from work sometimes. So some of them like it, some of them don't. Oftentimes reporters will say, on LinkedIn, for example, their bio, they'll say, don't contact me here, just send me an email. So watch out for that. But it really is on a case-by-case basis. Again, there's no magic. I found there's no magic answer to this. There's a lot of people out there that will say, if you write an email this way, it'll grab this reporter's attention. If you do this, if you do that, but nobody's on the other end and knows exactly what's going to work. It's just the way it is. And I would say there are some rules that I would follow, though, to give yourself the best shot. One would be when you're drafting the email to make sure that you can develop a concise subject line. You don't want to have a subject line that, let's say, has 30 words in it, because ultimately that's going to run off their screen and they're probably going to do what you do, which is just disregard it, delete it, whatever the case may be. My rule of thumb is try to have it be 12 words or less. And sum up what you're saying, which takes a little skill, a little practice, but once you do it enough times, that isn't as hard down the road. And then I would also say, try to keep it to maybe 2 to 3 paragraphs max your email. And I always like to use bullet points. So if I'm trying to communicate why a reporter should be interested in speaking with my client or why they should find the story interesting, I usually give 3 to 4 bullet points towards the middle that outline discussion topics of what that spokesperson can talk about. And then lastly, I would say try to put your call to action further to the top. So make it clear that if you want to do an interview with a reporter, that's why you're reaching out. And then maybe towards the middle, say, again, I'm available, or my client's available to talk about X, Y, Z. We think it's valuable because of this reason and that reason. So you don't want to bury it, because if the reporter takes a while to get to that point, they might not even see what you're looking for. So just try to be clear as much at the top as you possibly can.
Very interesting, because for me, I kind of, my template is like the first paragraph is always about how amazing they are, kind of like their last piece I read was so good, blah, blah, blah. And then my call to action is like, I will mention is like the last paragraph.
Yeah.
So I'm going to change that to move up. Yeah, which makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, one thing I would actually say is that I would actually be careful about complimenting the reporter too much. Some of them do find it to be off-putting, which I don't understand, but some of them do find it to be off-putting. So a lot of reporters like you to just go into the reason why you're emailing them, right? So you can say, hi, so-and-so, I saw that you covered this story. I actually have another perspective to offer you from my client XYZ. Here's what we're thinking. They appreciate that more often than I would say going into saying like, hey, your piece was great. Here's why I thought so. You're an amazing reporter. They want you to just go into what you want, because they get so many emails, like you said, and they're just busy throughout the day.
Yeah, very interesting. So here's a question from Dan, and thank you for joining us live. He asked, I don't know if you know this, do large publications actually pay for written pieces? Do you happen to know?
That's an interesting question. I'm curious where sort of what Dan's looking for that answer. I would say if you're looking to contribute to publications, if you're looking to write a piece and offer that to get placed into larger publications, there are some that do that. But I would say right now there are more publications that are probably asking you to pay to be a contributor. So for example, so Forbes, for example, has a variety of different councils, right? So they have like the HR council, the business council, and then if you pay a fee, you can write, let's say, an unlimited number of contributed articles that'll get placed on the council's landing page. And their pitch to you is, well, if you pay the fee, you get exposed to the Forbes network, you build new connections, you can say that you're writing in Forbes. So there are some publications out there that do that, but there are publications too that will pay you for your work. But again, I think it kind of depends on the situation that he's talking about, which is you're looking to be a freelance writer, a contributing writer. Those people do get paid, but they still have to get their pieces vetted out by the editors and whatnot before they go live.
That is so interesting. So like for Forbes, they're a Forbes council. So if you want to pay to write for them, do you have to go through an application or interview? Okay.
Yeah, you still have to go through an application process. For Forbes in particular, it's kind of a high bar, especially because they want you to come from a company, depending on the council, a company that makes a lot of money. So if you're sort of a solo writer that's just looking to, write to Forbes, I don't think the council is the best place for you. It's probably going to a contributing editor or a managing editor to see if, you might be able to submit a one-off piece, or Forbes has staff writers. You can try to contribute to their material, or even try to go to one of their contributors who don't have that, don't write for Forbes as a day job, but they still contribute to the publication off and on and might use you as a source. And then you can get into Forbes that way.
Very interesting, very interesting. So many great tips. Yeah, I love it. And so in one of you, let me share my screen real quick.
Sure.
And so in one of your blog articles, I'm going to share the link in the comment section. So you shared 3 assets that can help us land media placements. And you talked about bios and high resolution images or videos, links to social media, and schedules. So I wonder if you can elaborate on each of the three elements to us and maybe give us some best practices to improve each of the three assets.
Sure. So I think when we're talking about high resolution images or videos, the reason that I called those out is because those assets create for more engaging content for a reporter or a producer, right? So a reporter for print online, a producer for television, radio, or podcast like we're doing today. And so, those images or video could be anything like your headshot, video of you speaking on stage, anything that shows you in action or just gives a preview of what you look like to an audience is a really good thing to share. And I would say that if you're looking at images, they should be 300 DPI or higher. That's sort of the rule of thumb of what's considered high resolution. So try to see what the properties of that image are before you send it over to your reporter. And then in terms of social media, this one's a little tricky because the reason that I suggested it was that, again, this goes back to an earlier point I made, is that reporters are really looking for using sources, if they can, that have a good following on social, because if you post their article to your social, the understanding or the thought is that hopefully they'll get more engagement through that, and that'll drive more traffic to their page. So if you have a sizable social following on Instagram, Twitter, if you have a good amount of activity on LinkedIn, you want to mention that to reporters and share your handles so they can go on your pages and see that for themselves. If you don't really have that, I wouldn't say to include it because it might be meaningless at that point. They're probably not going to see the value in it too much. If they ask for your handles after you pitch them and they just need them because they go through some kind of protocol to promote you that way, that's totally fine. But I don't think you necessarily need to proactively offer it if you don't have a strong following, I would say. And then lastly, the schedule. So what I was saying in the article is that, if you're going to start pitching the press, it's really, before you do that, it's good to have an understanding of what your schedule realistically looks like for, let's say, the next 2 to 3 weeks. Because if you start getting requests from reporters and you can't accommodate their request to get them comment when they need it or to hop on the phone and have a conversation, realistically, it's not going to do too much damage to your relationship. But if that keeps happening over and over again, they're kind of going to see you as the boy or girl that cried wolf, where you keep asking for, them to use you, but then you can't show up to the occasion and get them what they need. So just make sure that you really have the time to do it. As opposed, the other thing you want to keep in mind is you want to go into a situation where you get the interest and then, maybe let's say they're like, okay, send me email comment, right? But, you only send them 4 sentences because you're busy with back-to-back meetings that day. So you just want to make sure that you have the time to do it the right way and actually allocate the time to be able to do it.
Yeah, very, very interesting. So I wonder if is there let's say that we kind of reach out to a person, you mentioned, send them a message. So if they don't respond, is there a specific follow-up time? How many days do we wait until we follow up with them? And also I have another question related to social media.
Yeah, sure. It really depends on the reporter. Some reporters will say, I need this in 2 hours. Some might say 24 hours. Some might say, yeah, it's a longer lead story. Get it to me next week or a month, whatever. It really depends. I would say that for television and radio, the turnaround time is typically quicker because they have to fill a 24/7 piece to make sure they're getting content on the air. And then for podcasts, as I'm sure some of them could book out months in advance, right? So you have a bit more time there. But yeah, it really depends on the reporter, producer, whoever you're working with. I would say general rule of thumb, probably 3 to 4 days max for print and online, and then 24 hours for TV and radio.
Yeah, I remember a few years ago, and I got a reporter who sent me a DM from Fox News, asked me something about education through Twitter, but I missed it. I don't know what I was doing, and I got back to her a day later. She was like, "Wow, game over." I was like, "Wow, they really
yeah, they move fast. Yeah,
very, very fast." That was the only time I got contacted by someone from Fox News, and I totally wasted it.
Well, I'm sure you can rebuild the relationship. I'm not, it's one time, so I wouldn't worry about it.
Yeah, so very interesting to know. So in terms of social media, you mentioned that if we have a relatively larger network, definitely mention that. Is there kind of a number that they're looking for, or just
Yeah, I don't know if there's a specific number that they're looking for. I mean, for me, if I see somebody has if it's an individual, if I see somebody has, 5 to 10,000 Twitter followers, I would say for someone that doesn't work, they're not the CEO of a big company, they're not a celebrity. I personally think that's pretty strong. And especially if they're active on Twitter, it shows that they're not necessarily buying Twitter followers, for example. So I think 5 to 10 is a good number, more on the 10 side. But yeah, it also really depends on who the person is. For example, if they have 5,000 followers, but they're the CEO of General Motors, which probably would be more, but they're the CEO of GM,
Right.
it still might be valuable for them to go, for a reporter to get on the CEO of GM's Twitter, So I think it also depends on who the person is or the organization is.
Totally. And not just like in terms of numbers, because as you mentioned, I have personally friends who just go out and purchase followers on Twitter and Instagram to have that vanity metric. And so like in terms of reporters, where do they tend to congregate? On Twitter or on LinkedIn or on Instagram? Do you happen to know?
Yeah, so Twitter is probably the number one spot. Where a lot of the conversation goes. That's where a lot of reporters look for, for trending news or what people are talking about, so they know where to, move their coverage. So I would say Twitter. I do see reporters active on LinkedIn as well, but definitely more so Twitter, and not so much on Facebook.
Also on Facebook, or
not so much on Facebook.
Yeah, I would be surprised if they are actually on Facebook. Yeah, but Twitter, in fact, as you mentioned, so the times that I got connected or contacted by reporters, they all happened on Twitter. So yeah, good to know, to keep that in mind. You were talking about news. Actually, I think somewhere on your website you mentioned you have this concept called news jumping, and how we can leverage popular trending topics and to position ourselves or our clients as credible sources. So I wonder if you can elaborate on that and maybe give us an example or so. Like the examples I can think of right now is COVID. Everyone's kind of talking about COVID. So give us some like practical tips.
Sure. So, the concept of news jumping is that if a story breaks, if there's a story that breaks that aligns with your expertise, the idea is, well, there's two different ways to think of this. So one is that so let's take education, for example, right? So if, let's say you're an expert on education policy and there's a new federal policy about, education budgets for next year, if you have a certain stance on that and you see a few reporters write about it, you can reach out to those reporters and you can say, hey, I saw you wrote about XYZ. I actually, spent 5 years working on federal policy for education. I think I'd be able to offer some really good insight for a follow-up piece for you, right? So you're taking the news that's been reported on and working it towards your favor. And the other way you can do that is you can use what's called a news peg. So if you're talking about topics related to education policy that maybe aren't exactly what the breaking news is, but they're similar, you can tell reporters, hey, this news just broke regarding federal education policy. It's generating a lot of buzz. Thought you might be interested in covering this as well. And here's the kind of angle that I can bring to the table, or the kind of point of view that I can bring to the table. So you're using that as what's called a news peg, which basically tells the reporter this is trending news, to say this is why you should be covering education policy in general, and here's how I can help you.
That's interesting. So do you actually recommend people set up Google alerts? I need to be better at checking my own Google alerts, but I did one for,
Absolutely. Yeah. Google alerts, and I'm sorry, my computer keeps going here. Google alerts are the easiest way to figure out what the trending news is. And what you want to try to do is set up alerts in, again, the space you operate in. So if you're in education, set an alert for education technology, education policy, higher education, pre-K, something like that, where you're going to get all the news sources or all the sources that are commenting on the news into your inbox, and then you can get a very good understanding very quickly of what's trending and what's not.
Yeah, definitely. Any other places that you recommend can help us keep an eye on what is going on besides Google Alert?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, Twitter is a great place. So I personally don't like to necessarily get my news from Twitter, but I think it's a really good starting point to just get an understanding of what the major topics are that people are talking about. I wouldn't necessarily, again, use that as the be all end all, but I think it's a good place to go other than Google alerts. Also, LinkedIn, if you're within the business space, LinkedIn does a very good job of highlighting, I would say, the top 10 to 15 stories for the day on the sidebar of the main homepage.
That's awesome. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, I'm going to, now I notice I'm actually using more and more social media almost as a search engine, right? Like kind of Twitter, definitely one, hashtag on LinkedIn. I don't really pay attention, but now I'm going to the sidebar and also follow relevant hashtags. So here's a question from Peter. He's asking, is HARO, Haro, a good way to communicate with the journalists? And I used to use them. Are they really good or?
Yeah, so it's Haro, help a reporter out.
Sorry.
That's okay. I think Haro's okay. The problem with Haro is that if you're not, a lot of times, not all the time, it's not a be all end all, but a lot of times if you're not first to the dance with your comment when the reporter puts out their request, a lot of times you put the work in to develop your comment for that reporter and it doesn't go anywhere because the reporter already got like 5 or 10 sources. Mm-hmm. I think and I should maybe take a step back and just explain what Haro is. Haro is basically a service that reporters use. It's like a listserv where basically they put their request for comment into the system, and then the system facilitates via email requests for comment from all different reporters in different categories. So there's like lifestyle, education, tech, general, consumer. It's all over the place. But there's different categories that you can provide comment in. And so again, I think if you respond to a reporter in a timely manner, it's a good source. Yep, that's Haro. It's a good source. And you should use it anyway because it is a good conversation starter with a reporter. Because you could always go back to a reporter even if they don't use you and say, hey, I responded to your Haro. I saw you weren't able to use it, totally fine. But just wanted to start a conversation and see if maybe we could connect and see how I could help you in the future, right? So there's definitely value to it, but I think I think being as quick as you can to respond to the Haro is very important. Also, if you're responding yourself or you're working with a client that uses it, before you get your client too involved with Haro, it would be good to give or to level set expectations about what the experience with Haro is realistically going to be like. That, if you take the time to develop comment for a reporter, it won't necessarily result in coverage. We can't guarantee that, but it's good to try so that they're not expecting coverage to come back every single time.
That's good to know. Maybe I should reactivate. I unsubscribe. Yeah. Maybe I should.
Free too. So.
Yeah, totally. Subscribe again. So earlier you mentioned, and you also talked about this on your website, how we can leverage, data, survey, book release to generate the media interest. My friend and I, Julia McCoy, she and I were actually writing a book, Skip the College, Save the Tuition. So I'm really interested in learning more about this. How do you think we can leverage survey, data, book release, etc., to generate media interest?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Surveys and data are extremely powerful for garnering media coverage. Reporters love them. I think the biggest way to leverage it to your advantage is to try to get reporters to hyperlink back to, let's say, a survey's landing page, right? Because then if anything, one, that provides value to their readership to find more information, right? So they're getting the value add there. But also it provides more lead generation for you. So the more readers that go to it, the more emails you're going to get into your system. And the more potential customers, followers, whatever you're looking to accomplish, you're going to get from that. So I think getting reporters to hyperlink back and drive traffic back to wherever people can download your survey report. If it's a book, pre-ordering the book on Amazon, so that hyperlink to the Amazon page, whatever they can do to drive traffic back to that, I think is great.
Okay, thank you. So I guess another kind of relevant question is, where do we even find those reporters who are talking about education, who are talking about business, who are talking about whatever that we're talking about? So do you actually go to specific publications and do a search, who are their editors, or is there actually an easier way, like a website that we can check out that have
Yeah, so most people use a site or a service called Cision. It's sort of the standard bearer for PR professionals to just be able to find contacts. There are other services out there like Quoted. Meltwater is another one. So I start there. And then after that, I move on to LinkedIn, and also looking at each reporter's individual author page, because that will give me a much better understanding of what he or she typically covers. So I would say those services that I mentioned, they're a good starting point, but then I would definitely move on to double check what you're doing with another service like LinkedIn or the reporter's actual page on the publication's website.
Well, that makes so much sense. So you mentioned Meltwater, and what is the other one? Quoted or something?
Oh, Quoted, Quoted.
Okay.
Quoted in particular is a good one. So I like that. That's also more geared towards business, finance, fintech, but it's a good service.
Okay, awesome. I'm definitely, I wrote them down. I'm definitely going to check them out.
Yeah.
And I heard of like Session. I used them before, and LinkedIn. So how do you like this kind of, let's say that you discover a person's name, you go to their LinkedIn profile to make sure this person, the information is up to date, is relevant, is still talking about this. Okay, kind of double check on accuracy.
Yeah. So, I mean, Cision or something similar, like the other services that I mentioned, they're essentially contact databases, right? There's some other features that you can use with it to get insights from media coverage, for example, that you secure. But a lot of what it's used for is identifying contact information for reporters. So when you go into these services, you can type in their name. There's a contact name category, for example. You type in the person's name, and then you get their email if they make it available, their phone number, and you get their contact information. But I think the importance of going to LinkedIn and let's say their actual author pages is to get a better understanding of, okay, is the information that Cision's giving me in terms of the kind of contact or topics they cover, is it accurate, right? So if you're looking at an education reporter, Cision might say, yeah, they cover K through 12. But then if you go to their LinkedIn page, they might say, no, I cover higher education, right? So you want to make sure that everything is consistent.
So I just like this as I hear you speak, talking about this, there is so much like homework that we have to do to make sure now it's like the message that we're sending out can actually generate some ROI for us. Yeah. So I want to shift our focus a little bit. And one line of service that you guys do is podcast development. So when I first read that, I was like, podcast and media placements, they don't seem to really go hand in hand. But the more I think about it, wow, it makes so much sense. So can you explain to us the strategic role of podcasts in securing media placements?
Yeah, sure. So I think, well, let me ask this. Are you asking from the perspective of what's the value of going on a podcast or
so I think you can discuss from both, right? Going to a podcast and also from me, like, I have a business and how can I leverage podcasts to get myself into Forbes, for example, or Inc. magazine. Yeah.
Right. So I think the value of going on podcasts, much like I'm doing today, is podcast audiences, I'm sure yours is included in this, are really good for establishing brand identity, brand loyalty, establishing a following. So to me, that is really the core reason to do podcasts. And depending on how targeted you want to go in terms of the audience you want to reach, there are so many podcasts that are specialized that you can really reach. Even if it's a smaller audience, you can really do a good job of reaching the right audience. And podcasts are where audiences are right now. I actually read a stat a few months ago that said that there were more people monthly listening to podcasts than going on social media. So
that's interesting.
So you'd be very happy about that. But yeah, so I think in today's world, podcasts are absolutely where you want to be. And, listen, they're not easy to do, right? Because not everybody can talk like you and I can for 40 minutes and have no problem with it, right? So it's not for everybody. I think you definitely, though, if you have the capacity to be flexible, it's good to try to work your way up to being able to do podcasts because they are extremely valuable, as you know yourself.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, I have been hosting this for almost 3 years, has definitely benefited my business's visibility and brand awareness and generating leads on so many different levels, for sure. Yeah.
And the thing I would say in terms of developing your own podcast, from the value of, or from a media relations value, I think the first thing to keep in mind is that, you can easily invite reporters to come on your podcast, right? So that helps to separate yourself from a lot of people that are emailing those reporters, where you're offering something a little bit different, right? So you can invite the reporter to come on your podcast, and especially if you have a solid podcast like yours, it's been around for a few years, it's a good audience, it features some good guests. If you feature that reporter, it helps to get some engagement for their page, right? And it helps to give them content to go back with, to maybe write about, or to promote the podcast on their page so they can get some more engagement that way. So I think that's one thing to keep in mind. The other thing is that when you're looking to reach out to the media, podcasts are a really good source for developing pitch topics, right? So if you have a 40-minute or an hour conversation with the guest, and you go back into that conversation, you might be able to pull out 3 storylines that you think a reporter might be interested in covering that you talk about in the podcast. So that's another core benefit there. And then I would also say that it's a really good credibility booster for reporters. Like you, for example, you can say that you talked to Seth Godin, who's a really big.
Yeah, how about that?
Thank you. I'll let you say it. But yeah, no, you can say that you've talked to some really top tier guests. And if you can show a reporter, hey, listen, I myself are talking to industry leaders, like I'm doing the due diligence here, and I have a lot of good insight to share, that helps to really boost your credibility and showcase them why they should talk to you against other people.
Yeah, totally. I'm curious. I'm just reading this comment from Peter. There are so many podcasts out there.
Yeah.
I wonder if, because people tend to listen to podcasts when they are commuting. Do you happen to see any numbers? How is COVID? Because right now everyone works from home. Is that affect?
I did see. I haven't read too much into the stats on that, but I did see a headline that says that said that because of coronavirus, podcast listenership increased, which makes sense because if you're listening to it anyway, you're stuck at home. You might end your day sooner. You might put it on the background. Now you don't have to worry about somebody looking over your shoulder because you're listening to a podcast in the office. Now you kind of do what you want to do. So it's easier to put the podcast on the background and just listen as you're doing work.
Yeah, I love that. So many great tips. I also love how you mentioned, inviting a reporter. I assume you want to invite someone who is kind of in your specific industry niche. Just a few weeks ago, I interviewed a senior reporter, contributor to Forbes. So after the interview, as we were exchanging emails about the interview, so she heard about my story. She's like, "Oh, I need to write about you." But I totally didn't expect that to happen. It's just such a nice byproduct. I interview her. Now she's doing a story about me. So very interesting. So I think this really, really works. People should definitely check it out. Yeah, I love it. Yeah. So after, I assume, let's say that, we did the work, we got covered, we got featured in whatever inside higher education. So it's all good. So what do we do after we secure a media placement? And I assume there is a lot more that we can do to maximize the value. So can you give us some ideas?
Yeah, sure. So I think you hit on something that's really important to keep in mind is that it's very important to be proactive with your media coverage, right? So it's always great to get the placement itself. It's always going to be great to be able to say, gone to the New York Times, Forbes, or Inside Higher Ed, for example, but that's not always going to guarantee engagement. It's not always going to push the needle forward. What you have to consider doing is how can you use that placement to your advantage after the fact? So for example, is it pulling quotes of yours from the placement to create social posts? Is it using the placements in sales conversations to be able to say, I was featured in Forbes, for example, to talk about XYZ, which I know your company focuses on, would love to have a chat about my thoughts and maybe ways that we can work together, right? So trying to change up your outbound sales strategy. Is it using it for marketing collateral in newsletters or brochures, or digital brochures now probably, but brochures help generate, a larger audience for your brand, right? So it's thinking past the placement. That's what I always say, thinking past the placement. It's not just about getting the media coverage, it's about what you can do with it after.
Yeah, I agree. So I don't even know if this involves copyright issue. Let's say that I got an interview with Fox News or got featured in Forbes. Can we actually repurpose that piece of content? Like, for example, publish this our own blog article, or maybe break that into smaller pieces or turn that into a video. Is that against copyright law? How does it even work?
No, unless they're, well, I should say, it really depends on the publication, but typically, unless a publication or your piece, let's say that reporter's coverage or an op-ed that you place, for example, right? Unless that was behind a paywall, um, once the coverage goes live, you should be able to syndicate that onto your social channels, no problem. The only two instances, again, that I think I've ever seen an issue with that is one, if your content is behind a paywall, because then you have to pay for copyright, or what's called reprint rights, which basically means you buy the article from the publication and then you can do whatever you want with it, right? Because if they just let you post it, there wouldn't be a point in putting it behind a paywall and having people pay to read it, their audience pay to read it. The other thing is with broadcast outlets, specifically TV and radio, if you do an interview and record it on your end, sometimes they have internal regulations about what the person can do with that. So you always want to just double check with any station or network that you're working with to make sure that if you record it, I mean, you obviously, you want to try to get a clip from the producer that you're working with, because that's going to be the highest quality anyway. But if they can't share it and you recorded it, you just want to make sure that you're okay to do that. But if it's a article that goes live on a website or a blog and it's free and anybody can read it, there's no reason why you can't share it widely, but it's always good to double check and just make sure.
That's great, because now I'm just like developing some additional ideas that I can actually use to leverage the media mentions that I already got. So that's a great idea. Yeah. So here's such a nice comment from Scott. Thank you for joining us live. I so agree. Yeah. Dropping
awesome.
dropping so much value. So let me know, everyone, if you guys have any additional questions. And we are just like wrapping it up here. So is there any like exciting projects that you are working on you want to share with us?
Yeah, sure. I mean, so the podcast development service is pretty much brand new, especially because of coronavirus. We launched it in January, but COVID upended that a little bit. But we're back on that train. So, I would just say to your audience, if you were kind enough to visit the website and learn a little bit more about our service there, that would be great, because we are looking to work with some awesome people to help them develop their podcasts, or make improvements to the one that already, or to one they have that already exists. So we would love to work with you on that. And I would say that's probably the most exciting thing we're working on. But we're always looking to engage with some awesome clients. So if anyone's interested in learning more about our services and how we might be able to work together, you can visit the website. You could also email me directly at Justin, JUSTIN, at pressrecord.co. So PRESSRECORD.co, Justin at pressrecord.co. And we would love to talk about possibly working together.
Totally. And I kind of have another question. I saw someone's comment. So like for someone, if this person or business is kind of new, never got featured in any large media publication. So I assume there's a hierarchy, right? You want to start with some like low-hanging fruits. So in that case, we should always shoot for the highest, the most credible one, like Forbes, or is there a kind of hierarchy we climb?
Yeah, so I would say that I would shoot as high as you possibly can, right? But just have the expectation that it's likely not going to happen. And I say that because I've seen people with zero media experience get into really awesome publications like a Forbes, for example, because what it's really all about is the expertise that you can bring to the table. So if you've never worked with an outlet before, but you go to Forbes and say, hey, listen, here's my bio. I have a lot of experience in this with, maybe I was an academic at Harvard, maybe I worked at General Motors, whatever it is, they're still going to be interested if you have the credentials to back it up. So I would just say, be encouraged to shoot for the stars, but just be realistic in your expectations.
Yeah. So how long do we wait before we kind of like give up? Like, oh my God, this person's never going to get back to us.
Never give up. Never give up, because there's always a way. I always tell this story that when I was at my first job, one of the projects that I got was to get a body shop media coverage. A body shop, like get them media coverage in Baltimore with Baltimore TV. And Baltimore is like a top probably 20, 25 TV market. It was about a body shop that was offering discounts for services on cars to help donate to a breast cancer foundation, which was obviously a great initiative, but there are millions of businesses that do that, right? So why would anyone really care? I wound up getting them on Baltimore TV.
Wow.
So if I can do that, you can do anything. And I always say that because there's so many factors that go into getting media coverage. At the end of the day, something will hit. It's just a matter of when. And being pleasantly persistent is really the key.
Exactly. I actually just finished a coaching call. We're talking about money is always in the follow-up. So yeah, it's so true. Don't give up. Yeah. I love it. So any parting piece of advice you want to share with us in terms of securing media placements, being featured in the media?
No, I would just say again, don't give up. Again, it's really being strategic. That's why we call ourselves a strategic media relations agency, because we really believe in taking the time to understand who we're reaching out to. And that is the biggest thing that you can do when conducting media relations. So again, understanding who your reporter target is, who exactly or what exactly they're writing, understanding the publication that they write for, who is their target demographic, what kind of stories are they really looking for, making sure that you really have the time to do what you're setting out to do. And if you take those fundamental steps, you will find success.
Totally.
Again, you may not land in the New York Times in the first 3 months that you do it or the first year, but you will still get quality coverage. And I would say, again, to something that we spoke about a little while ago, always make sure that you're thinking past the placement. Have a strategy for how you're going to use that media coverage to better your business. And don't just rely on the media placement itself.
Exactly. I think for people who don't have time to work on this, I can see how much work this involves. Because for me, like they all came to me organically. But if I want to practice this, I think I can definitely see the value in working with a company like you, and then someone does it for you. So you want to make sure that the outreach is perfect. Everything's great. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, there's nothing better than getting an inbound lead from a reporter or an inbound request, but those can dry up quickly, and you always want to make sure that you're in your ear.
Yeah, this is great. So I have been sharing Justin's LinkedIn profile. I think Peter shared his email. We also shared his website. Feel free to connect with Justin, not Peter, sorry. And in next Wednesday, same time, same location, I have my dear friend Viveka, who is a LinkedIn superstar. And she actually came to my show in January this year. And this time we are going to discuss LinkedIn Sales Navigator, which is something that I have started using a few months ago, but I'm definitely not a pro. So Viveka is going to come to the show, and we are going to discuss how to use Sales Navigator. Is this a good investment for your business? So definitely mark your calendar and join us live next Wednesday or Thursday for some of you. Same time, same location. And thank you so much again, Justin, for a great interview. And thank you so much, everyone, joining us live. Appreciate you guys. And enjoy the rest of your day or evening or morning, depending on where you are. Bye.
Thanks, everybody.